Lou Piniella was getting nervous. In Arizona for Seattle's 2001 spring training, Sweet Lou had spent weeks watching his prized Japanese import, Ichiro Suzuki, slap and bloop pitches to left field, to deep short, never pulling anything hard to the right side. Many American scouts had wondered if Ichiro's smallish stature at 5'11", 175, and lack of exposure to big league pitching would prevent him from catching up to big league heaters. Their doubts were obviously echoing Piniella's head. And not just in Lou's head, the entire squad was wondering about Ichiro. I think everyone was skeptical, recalled pitcher Jeff Nelson. He really didn't do anything in spring training, and people were thinking, this guy might be overmatched. Then Sweet Lou got an idea. He decided that Ichiro needed to take extra batting practice, which many students of Ichiro would consider hilarious, because Ichiro was one of the most dedicated players in the history of the game. In the cages, the Seattle skipper openly questioned the 27-year-old rookie. "Do you ever turn on the ball?" Ichiro said that he did, sometimes, and then they played a meaningless spring training game. After socking a pair of doubles, Ichiro came up again in the 7th. This time, he clubbed a homer to right field. He came back to the dugout and asked Piniella, "Are you happy now, Lou?" It would be the last time anyone doubted the baseball greatness of Ichiro. He went on to have a rookie season for the ages, winning the batting title, stolen base title, Rookie of the Year, and the AL MVP award, only the second player ever to do so in his first season. His 242 hits were the most in 71 years. The Mariners won 116 games, tying the all-time record of the 1906 Chicago Cubs. And he just kept doing it after that. 10 straight years of 200 hits, 10 straight years of winning a Gold Glove, 10 straight seasons hitting over 300, 12 straight years of stealing 20-plus bases. Since his second big league game, his career average never dipped below 300. He ended up with 3,089 hits, which, when coupled with the 1,278 hits he got in Japan, places him first all-time in the professional ranks with 4,367 hits. Pete Rose wasn't amused. The Japanese were making him out to be the hit queen. The hit king said, soon they start counting Ichiro's high school stats. But Ichiro did something that Rose never did. In 2004, he set an MLB record that is probably about as safe as DiMaggio's 56-game hitting streak and Hack Wilson's 190 RBIs. He notched 262 hits in a season, a record that will more than likely last longer than Bobby Bonilla's Mets contract. But before we get into that, I want to ask you a question. What's the most stressful part about buying baseball tickets for you? For me personally, it's not knowing necessarily what all the fees are going to be until right at the very end, so I can't really trust any price I see, and not really knowing where the seats exactly are in the stadium. The posted location is only so helpful. That's exactly why I've been using today's sponsor, Game Time, to find the best deals for myself for years now. From those baseball games to concerts to even hockey games, I've trusted Game Time for a long time now to help me find not only the best deal, but the place that I'm actually going to be able to see the event that I'm going to see. I also love how their recommended seats feature that are a good price is actually pretty accurate in comparison to some other services. I literally was scanning through the app earlier today, looking to buy some Angels tickets. So, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time today. First step is to download the app, create an account, and then use code MTC for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use code MTC for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Now, back to our video. When asked by a Miami journalist what he would do after baseball, Ichiro replied, "I think I'll just die." This summer, that will become impossible because Ichiro will easily be a first ballot selection for the Baseball Hall of Fame, and his legend won't ever perish. Ichiro still has baseball in his blood. He shows up at high school games and practices in Japan, often unannounced, and will hit BP or pitch to the kids. If you spend 10 minutes watching Ichiro's career highlights, either throwing, fielding, running the bases, or hitting, you'll realize he was a transcendent talent, as good a player who's ever stepped on a big league diamond. But with all that being said, there's an oddity to Ichiro's stats that, when you parse the numbers, lead you to a startling conclusion. Somehow, this incredibly unique talent was both overrated and underrated in unique ways when he played. You see, it wasn't that he wasn't just as good as advertised, just that how he was good was actually a bit different than people realized at the time. But before we dig into that, we have to go back, way back, to the origins of Ichiro and how the legend molded his game from a very young age. Ichiro turned pro in 2nd grade. Okay, not really, but in 2nd grade, Ichiro began playing baseball like it was his job. It was then that his father, a former high school pitcher, began a routine with his youngest son that would persist until Ichiro attended high school. Ichiro would throw 50 pitches, make 50 infield plays, 50 outfield plays, and hit 200 soft tosses from his father. Then would come dinner, and after dinner, the two would head off to the batting cage for 300 more swings. All left-handed, even though Ichiro was naturally a righty. Lefties got down the line faster, his father reasoned, and so a lefty Ichiro became. This was a year-round routine that the weather didn't interrupt. Cold, hot, raining, didn't matter. In a 6th grade essay, Ichiro wrote that he played with his friends 5 or 6 hours per year. That's how much he practiced. Later, Ichiro would consider this routine a kind of hazing that led to much suffering, but Ichiro couldn't say no to his father as a youth. But one thing all this grinding just couldn't change was that he was small. At the end of his junior high school career, he stood just 5'9" and weighed 120 pounds. He didn't start until he was a junior, but over 2 seasons, he had hit .502 and never struck out swinging in 500 ABs once. Twice, he led his team to the Summer Koshien, the insane high school tournament that's basically Japan's version of March Madness. Still, he wasn't taken until the 4th round, 36th overall in the MPB draft, mostly because of his size and lack of corresponding projectability. He then spent most of the next 2 seasons in the minors, and when he finally got to play every day in 1994, he broke the MPB season hit record with 210 over 130 games. He hit .385 in the process, good enough to win his first MVP. He would win 2 more in the next 2 years while leading his team, the Oryx Blue Wave, to a league championship. He won 7 batting titles in a row to start his full season career. He got to be so famous in Japan that a letter addressed with just his first name would end up getting delivered to his house. But Oryx needed cash, and Ichiro was going to become a free agent. Instead of losing him to another MPB team, the club decided to post Ichiro, thinking that a US team would pay handsomely for one of the best players in the world. Seattle forked over $13 million to Oryx simply for the rights to sign him, and in 2001, Ichiro was starting in right field for the Mariners. When Barry Bonds first saw him, he said, "That little can hit." Between 2001 and 2010, Ichiro made the All-Star team and won a Gold Glove every single season. For those 10 consecutive years, he collected over 200 hits and hit over 300. In 9 of those years, he got MVP votes. In 7 of those seasons, he led the league in hits and ABs. He even led the league in WAR in 2004. Ichiro went on to play for 9 more seasons after that until he was 45 years old. After 2010, he never got 200 hits again or batted 300. The effectiveness he had gotten so consistent in producing fading in lieu of an aging curve destined to affect every MLB player at some point. He made no All-Star teams, won no Gold Gloves, and got no MVP votes. He had gotten traded near the deadline in 2012 to the Yankees, where he'd hit .362 to lead the Bombers into the playoffs. Here, Ichiro played in the postseason for his second and final time, losing to the Tigers in the ALCS. Ichiro never ended up playing in a World Series. He spent parts of the next 3 seasons with the Marlins, and in 2016, he blasted a triples for his 3,000th hit. The next season, he almost broke the single season mark for pinch hits, with 27 and 100 ABs. That was really the end, except for a few games he started in right field for the Mariners over the next 2 seasons, largely due to the nostalgia he was capable of inspiring and his undoubtedly helpful presence around the M's young players. He was the 5th oldest player to start on opening day in MLB history, when he appeared in right for a couple games in 2019, making this insane throw to finish out his playing days. Let's be clear, Ichiro was an epically great player, and if he'd begun in the majors at the age of 21, the record books would probably be very different. Pete Rose can complain all he wants, but he very well may have been the silver medal holder, and Ichiro may have worn the crown. Remember, all those hits in Japan came in seasons of just 130 games. His career total could have possibly been much higher than 4,367. Having said that, it's time to tackle what aspect of his game was probably a bit overrated. Today's data revolution in baseball has yielded some robust statistical tools that can unearth buried truths that have long been suspected. If you applied old school metrics to Ichiro's numbers, batting average, hits, steals, Gold Gloves won, then you can't help but gawk at the things that Ichiro did. Did you know that he also set a record in 2004 by hitting 225 singles? Yet another mark that probably won't get broken going forward. To put it simply, Ichiro's slap hitting ways probably led to him being given more credit than he may have deserved in his prime. Hear me out, this isn't disrespect, and I'll explain in a moment why he was drastically underrated in another way. In 2001, players like Jason Giambi were juicing. We know this because Giambi was outed in December 2004 by the San Francisco Chronicle. He'd gotten caught up in the Balco investigation, which might explain how he went from hitting 20 homers as a 26-year-old in 1997 to 43 in 2000 as a 29-year-old. With that being said, for today's interest, we're more so using him as a juxtaposition point for Ichiro's own productivity at the plate over this time period. Take 2001 for example, Ichiro's amazing rookie year where he hit .352 with 242 total hits. That same season, Giambi hit 38 homers, 47 doubles, and drove in 120, all while batting .342. A monster campaign by the reigning MVP, good for a league-leading OPS plus of 199. For those that don't know, OPS plus tries to level the playing field when it comes to evaluating the output rate of hitters. It sets a baseline of 100 for the average MLB player in any given season, using a complex formula that includes numbers like on-base percentage and slugging percentage. The more above 100 you get, the more above average a player becomes. When you arrive at 199, you've concluded that Jason Giambi was roughly about twice as impactful as the average MLB player in 2001. For some context, Babe Ruth's career OPS plus was 206, so for one season, Jason Giambi was basically Babe Ruth. He lost the MVP to Ichiro, whose OPS plus during that incredible rookie year was 126, which, to give him credit, is where Johnny Bench and George Foster sit on the all-time list, both very good hitters, though it is 245th all-time. Great, but not elite. Giambi's total WAR as well? 9.2 to Ichi's 7.7, a Mike Trout-esque WAR total in comparison to a Chris Bryant one. And it wasn't just OPS plus and WAR. The same results arise if you use WOBA or WRC+. Giambi's output in this respect was elite, with top of the league numbers of 465 and 193, whereas Ichiro ranked 21st and 26th in baseball. Again, this isn't to say Suzuki was a bad ball player by any means, he was still elite by every metric, but probably not MVP worthy that season. The same can be seen throughout his career. Remember that record-breaking year of 2004 with 262 hits and a 372 average? He had an OPS plus of 130 that year. Do you know what Kyle Schwarber's 2022 OPS plus was? The year he batted .218 with an 827 OPS and 200 Ks, albeit with 46 dingers? 131. This isn't to say Ichiro wasn't one of the best players in baseball that year, and obviously much better than Kyle Schwarber was in 2022, as when you combine what he did at the plate with his fielding and base running, he managed to register a Trout-esque WAR total himself this season with a 9.2 mark. In fact, this was probably the season he deserved an MVP more than any. But still, what he did at the plate was probably a bit overrated at the time. During Ichi's entire tenure in Seattle, he averaged a WRC plus and OPS plus around 115, and generated an average batting value per Fangraphs of around 15 per season. Again, impressive totals. But how do these stack up historically? Tony Gwynn, a very similar player to Suzuki in mold, averaged a WRC plus around 135 in his prime, and a batting value per season of around 30. Wade Boggs sat at marks of around 140 and 40 himself, and just recently, Luis Arraez's 2023 season featured an OPS plus of 131. That's 1 point higher than Ichiro ever tallied, along with his own batting value of nearly 25. Why was this? Why was Ichiro not as productive at the plate as people may have thought? There seems to be 3 principal reasons. 1, he didn't really walk. He registered just 2 over 50 walk seasons in his prime. This greatly drove down his overall OBP, an important metric in many of those advanced stats. 2, he didn't really hit for any power. This one is obvious to those who watch the day-to-day game. Going back to 2001 and examining a stat as simple as total bases, we can see how much less overall offense he generated at the plate in comparison to someone like Giambi. That year, Suzuki had 316 total bases, almost 30 less than Jason's 343, even with Suzuki registering over 60 more total hits. And the third and last prominent factor, I think, was the dominance of his era. When looking back, stats like OPS plus or really any of the plus stats rely on the environment in which they were generated, meaning that Ichiro probably suffers a bit from his performance being directly measured against the height of the steroid era. But even as this faded away in the late 2000s, his numbers didn't dramatically rise in these respects, even as his output stayed fairly consistent. So I don't think this overall had an especially large effect. But now, enough of that. Let's get to how Ichiro was actually underrated in the eyes of many baseball fans. It might seem odd to think of Ichiro as being underrated in any way, since many still consider him among the all-time greats, and he'll undoubtedly be a first-ballot Hall of Famer, perhaps unanimously. But, just as the advanced numbers bring down his overall stature as an elite hitter, closer inspections of other factors of his game bring into focus other ways he made up for this, creating more perceived value than perhaps he even gave back. We're going to be looking at his defense, his base running, and to a lesser degree his insane endurance, as a means to completing the full picture of Ichiro's monumental legacy in a fair and balanced manner. First up, the defense. Everyone knew Ichiro was a plus defender, as all those gold gloves gave evidence to, but more advanced fielding metrics bring an entirely new dimension to his prowess. Over the course of his career, according to Fangraphs, he made 99.5% of all routine plays, meaning he messed up about 5 out of 1,000 easy chances in the outfield, the kind that get made about 60 to 90% of the time. He basically handled all of those. More incredibly, he got to 74.2% of 50-50 balls, the plays an average MLB outfielder makes half the time. His 50-50 balls were the unlikely plays that got made between 10 and 40%. Ichiro made them at 45%, or almost half. Basically, he caught everything that he was expected to, and much of what he couldn't have been expected to. He saved 107 runs during his career, but in his heyday between 2001 and 2010, he ranked right behind another phenomenal outfielder, Carl Crawford, in runs saved overall, with 76. Ichiro was also the best outfielder in baseball at this time in RGFP, or runs saved by good fielding plays, with 18. That's why, according to Fangraphs, Ichiro's greatest value as a player was in his fielding, with a career value of 149.2. For context, they have his batting value at a still impressive 61. But that still would make it almost 100 points less impactful than his work in the field. But again, this probably isn't where he was most underrated. Like we said, everyone knew he was great in this respect, though maybe just not how great. This brings us to perhaps his most underrated overall skill, his base running, where his career value, again per Fangraphs, was 95. Here's where the subjectivity comes in a bit. Using similar methodologies, Baseball Reference considers Ichiro a more valuable hitter, with a career runs above average of 84, compared to his base running runs of 62. So why the difference between the two sites? Well, because it's hard to quantify base runner acumen with discrete values. There's too much blur in taking the extra base or scoring runs. What we do know is that Ichiro scored more often than an average MLB player when he reached base, at about 35% to 30%. And yes, causation here can get complex, but Ichiro also stole bases at a much higher success rate than the rest of the league while going pretty often, at a rate of 81% versus the league average of 72%. On top of all of this, he was obviously seen as a baseball genius by all who played against him consistently, and on the bases is probably where he best got to show it off, shrewdly taking extra bases on unlikely plays, scoring from first on doubles with regularity, and executing some of the craziest dodges of tags baseball has ever seen. And remember, Ichiro didn't break in until he was 27. 6 of his best years came when he was in his 30s. A young Ichiro would have been probably about as fast as his prime self, and an absolute terror on the bases, maybe even allowing him to approach career stolen base totals of 700 or 800, versus the still impressive 509 he tallied instead. That last area of underratedness comes in especially when reviewing his legacy. You see, it's easy to just look at the raw or advanced numbers and go from there, viewing the totals in a vacuum. But this would largely discount one additional area of Ichi's greatness that shouldn't be overlooked either, his aforementioned endurance. Ichiro was famous for his pre-game routines, a discipline that reached all the way back to his youth, when his father would do drills with him every night. There's even a hilarious story of Tom Brady himself trying to reach out to Suzuki to get his stretching routine, only to have him turn to a nearby teammate after receiving a text from the Hall of Fame quarterback and asking, "Who the f is Tom Brady?" What all this work did was keep Ichiro on the field for a truly insane amount of games. Ichiro played no less than 146 contests in a season from his age 27 through 39 campaigns, playing the full 162 4 times, and at least 155 games 11 times. This is part of the reason his cumulative numbers, both his hits and overall WAR totals, were always so impressive. He might not have produced the highest clip overall, but he played so much it allowed him to rack up counting stats like few others. And yeah, while games played might not be the sexiest stat, let me ask you, would you rather have a guy with a 7 WAR in 162 games or a 5 WAR in 80? Staying on the field is a skill, and no one was better at it in his day than Ichiro. The beauty of Ichiro's game was that modern statistics both elevate and downgrade his performance, mostly because the nuances of his skills evaded easy capture. The little things added up, sometimes in unexpected ways, and while he didn't ever crush 40 homers in a season, or even 20, he did everything with such technical skill that his true value is probably best seen through the lens of still evolving metrics. And it makes sense, this was a player who'd stand at home, no pitcher, and then at game speed run to each of the bases in order, over and over again. He did this by himself, after practice when no one was watching, just because he wanted to perfect the small gestures that separated him from every other MLB player. This was a guy who stretched for hours and hours in a manner that allowed him to post Iron Man games played totals that haven't been equaled since. A guy who executed batting practice like it was surgery, with each swing a slice of his scalpel, preparing him for the bright lights. Hopefully, this video will come across as I mean it to, as an exploration and dissection of the greatness of Ichiro, even if that greatness came in a manner that wasn't quite what many probably thought it was at the time. Now, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, consider liking and subscribing and clicking this playlist for more essay content just like this. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.